Hi, this is Carrie Berry, and I am going to present on website development. This is going to be an example that we developed a project with my partner Julia, and I'm going to use that as a foundation for the discussion. Overall, when looking at website development, we have gone over two key architectures. One is a two-tier static site where there is a client side rendering, which includes what the user will see on the website. You first start by deciding what you want on the website, what the look you want, and also the functionality that you want to accomplish. And you do that through considering how users might want to use your website. And looking at that, this is the client-side browser. Our particular project was a three-tier project. For two-tier, it would be the client-side browser, and then you would have a static server where the files would be predominantly or they would be static files, which would include your HTML and CSS files and potentially some JavaScript files that would determine what the website would look like and what the functionality on that website looks like. This is a three-tier full stack application using Node Express, static front-ended ES6, and then Mongo database in the background, which is the third layer. Looking at the static side, or static files on the server. They include HTML files, CSS files, which are for styling, and then JavaScript, which is for interactivity. So overall, the big picture is that the HTML files tell you what is going to be on the site. The CSS files give the styling for the site, and then the JavaScript files give any interactivity. In your static files, you may also have images, videos, or other things that need to be rendered on the website. The interactions in this modular type of development that we did for this project breaks down each function that you want into a separate file. So on the static side, we had a separate HTML, JavaScript, and CSS for each page. You'll notice for the JavaScript in this case, we only had 3 JavaScript files for the 4 pages because one of the pages did not have interactivity, so it didn't require that additional piece. Looking at the overall aspect, the front side or client side server has interactivity that lets the Express Node or Express and Node.js know that there is information required or some sort of action. And then the files that are connected to the backend of the website, which the backend would be, in this case, a database. For ours, we used for prompts. So the roots are smaller, broken down pieces of code that have essentially a single function in mind for each of the code pieces that are in there. And that interacts with the backend JavaScript files and the database JavaScript files to gather what information is needed and then communicate that back to the client side. The roots are designed with 4 main functions in mind, including create, read, edit, and delete for that. When you're connecting to the back end of the site for the website, we used a Mongo database in Atlas, which is a cloud-based server. The connection between those two are using Node.js and Mongo driver, and it conducts an MQL query and retrieves the data in JSON format, and that is directed back to the front end based on what has been requested. Our particular file and the way the database is set up is that each file in a Mongo database has a unique ID, or each entry, and ours had different categories, including use, prompt, contributor, and then a rating. And we had two collections in our set, which are recently deleted, and prompts. And so both of those. So this is a good example of a 3-tier client service full stack application, and a broad overview of each of the processes. I will now go over the HTML. HTML's purpose is to create the structure and content for each of the pages. The code syntax or formatting is essentially defining an element and then an attribute, which we'll talk about the different types of attributes that there could be, including ID or class or type, and then a value. So what the value of that is. And then there's a closing element as well. So that is, there has to be an opening and a closing, and that's the overall syntax. This here is a good example of an HTML document structure without the content, but the structure of each document is designed to break down parts of the website. The head of the document is not rendered on the website, but it includes the metadata that's needed. And in that, you can include things such as bringing in your CSS file styling. You can bring in any additional images that you would like to show up on the tab of the website, so you can reference that in that location as well. Looking at the body of the website or the body of the HTML file, that is further broken into parts. The body is what is going to be rendered on the website. And in looking at that, it's further broken into essentially your header, your footer, and then a middle main section. And in the main section, you can have it further broken down into sections, articles, paragraphs, and div or divider is a great tool that can be used for creating sections, for formatting, or for breaking things down further on the website itself. Within that structure, looking at the attributes specifically, you can use ID for an attribute of each element. There can only be, or each ID is always unique. So you wouldn't use the same ID for more than one element on a page. Class can be used for more than one. So if you had different things on the website that were, say, a button, then you could have specific names for types of button that would be carried through, and then you can use that in your styling. Other things you can look at are headers. H1 through H6 are different levels of headings. Each page can have one and only one header. Then other common items or elements that are used are unordered lists and then list items. So that'll create essentially a bulleted type list on your website. Links can be used. The link element is often used to bring in the CSS styling format, and then an anchor element can be used to create links throughout the text on your page or in a location where you're sort of surrounding that element that you want to be linked, and you use the term hyperreference and then add where you're linking to, whether it's relative within your own files or an outside source. Looking at that, you can also add images and videos to that. Notably, when you're adding an image, you would want to identify the source. And in addition, you always want to identify alternative text, which is alt. And with that, it will show up if the image is not able to be rendered on your site, or if there's accessibility needs on the website, that is helpful as well. And with the videos, there are many different aspects you can add, but you would add the video, the source, and then you often want to specify the height or width of the the rendering of that video on the page. Otherwise, it could be quite large. And then adding controls in that first element opener will add video controls automatically for that. The other common one is forms, which I found particularly useful in our project. You can identify a form on the website. You would start again open with and closing with forms, and then you can have multiple different inputs. It can be text, it can be numbers, it could be other items that you want to have it in that form itself. Um, I also want to mention for each of the topics that we're going to talk about, I have links here to an MDN uh, document, which gives you detailed instruction on each of the types of that. So that's often a very good resource to use for that. With the box model, that becomes important to both HTML and CSS. So I'll bring these up here. When you're specifying content on the page, it can create a formatted structure on your page. And so you really define the content height and width, and also how much padding do you want, how much border, the width of the border, and then also the margin. And so that will define overall how much space it takes up on your page or in a column. For the CSS styling, the purpose of the page is for styling and layout. With that, it will essentially tell your HTML file how it should be rendered on the page, and you can make adjustments based on the coding that you did on the HTML files. For example, by class or by ID, you can change things. The basic setup is that you have a selector, an attribute, and a value, and that will be changed throughout. For example, if you want to use color as an example, and the value could be blue, or you can use a variety of colors in there, and say you wanted to change it for everything that had an H1 heading, or everything that had an H2 heading would be a certain color, and you could change that way, along with fonts and a variety of other different variables. You can also set up the box formatting using this as well. Of particular note is looking at CSS specificity. With that, there's a ranking of what will be done first, because you may have something that's been coded for two different formats, and the rendering will be determined in a specific order. Important is one of them, and you should really never be using important. So that overrides anything, and it makes it very difficult to debug, because it's hard to find it, or it may be missed, and it can cause trouble when you're trying to make corrections. You can then, the next thing would be inline HTML, which again is not preferred as well, but you can do inline with the HTML, changing the color of a specific item. Then looking at the next in the hierarchy of um, the uh, the attributes would be looking at the ID, and that's denoted by a pound sign, ID name, whatever it is you actually named the ID in HTML would be used here, and then you would change the attributes that you wanted about that. Class would be dot class name, whatever you had named those class of items in HTML. For example, if you used a certain button or something, then you could change the color, the sizing, or things like that. And then the element would be next, and then there is a if there's a tie, the one that comes last in order wins. The other thing you can use is pseudo classes, for example, looking at the state of an item, if it's been recently visited or not visited. You can select how to change that as well. And the last thing to mention too is parent and children. For example, something under a certain heading targets an item that is directly after that within a divider, or you can do it if it's using the the plus sign. And again, that's one that targets the item immediately after or targeting all items after. Looking at the overall, again, combined selectors, you can use different aspects to combine two together. For example, here it's looking at the P for paragraph and title. So you would look at those together, but it also has to have the class of title. So you can combine them in a variety of ways. And again, here the MDN for CSS styling becomes very important. And in the box model that we already talked about, the padding, the border, and all elements can be identified in the CSS styling. The next building block that is used is JavaScript. The purpose of JavaScript is for interactivity in the page. So any actions that are there, looking at the building blocks and things to think about, with that, it becomes very powerful and you can change many, many different things. But there's 5 big concepts to think about with JavaScript, and that's looking at identifying variables. Essentially, you're using let or const. If you plan on changing it based on a state or later somewhere else in the code, you would use the term let to initially define that, and subsequently you could change it. If you're going to not change it, it can be const to define that variable. So you want to store data is one of the first uses. Var is also one, but we are essentially not using that because it can be problematic. And then noting that you can have different types of data, including a string, numbers, booleans, so true or false, an array, or objects, which is multiple key pairs or values. So you can store each of those. And then functions are reusable pieces of code, and that becomes very important for our projects and our development. So they're broken down, and it basically, you're naming the function in this example, you're naming it greet. And once a name is put in, it would say hello and then the name, and making sure you're conscious of spaces when you're doing that, where it says hello. That is creating the function, but it's not calling the function. In order to call the function, you can see on line 10 in this example here, call it here, it would say greet, and then the variable that would be put in would be professor in this case, and then it would say hello professor on calling the function. The arrow function is a modern syntax that simplifies those as well. Loops are an important function because they can create a repetition based on the specific criteria that are outlined. JavaScript can also be used to control the DOM and overall interactivity. MDN is also another valuable tool again here. With JavaScript, you can also have this way to call functions that is asynchronous, or also creating promises. And that is something that happens in the background, and it doesn't pause what is happening otherwise. So it is an asynchronous way to gather information and have interactivity. Another thing that's particularly notable is modules, and that is essentially breaking down your code into different pieces of reusable code. The value of that is that you can really reuse the pieces, and then it's also more readable, easier to debug because you have small broken down pieces of code, so you can look at them individually versus having a large file to look at. Bootstrap is an extremely valuable developer tool in which there is a framework of pre-written collections of CSS and JavaScript UI components, so you don't have to build all of them from scratch. Looking at the database aspect of the back end, we used, again, Mongo has documentation for their sites as well, and then different interactivities and codes that can be used for that. With that, we have the Mongo database, which actually stores the data in JSON-like files. We have Mongo Database Atlas. We did use that for our project, and that is a cloud hosted Mongo database. Compass and Mongo Shell or Mongo SH are developer tools that help you to use the Mongo database locally as you're developing, and it makes it a little bit smoother without adding barriers, but you don't bring those to production. And then Mongo Driver is what actually connects Node.js to the Mongo database. A few other noteworthy developer tools that have been helpful and we've been learning about include the NPM package management system, as well as the package JSON. Anyone who clones the project and runs npm install will have the package JSON tell it exactly what to download. And that's automatically tracked as part of the package management, as well as the ESLinter and Prettier. ESLinter helps with ensuring that code it has no errors as much as possible, and Prettier helps with formatting. That addresses the broad overview and deep dive into some sections for what we have covered in the class thus far and the broader connections. So for my coding example, I'm going to update my web page. When I developed the web page, I really did not like how the top of this came out. I don't like that the links are there. It seems to be too much. So using Bootstrap navigation, I'm going to, I've selected, I like the look of this navigation bar. So what I'm going to do, I have reload working, so this should automatically update, and my plan is to update these social media links and move those to the footer, and then update the navigation bar to this one. So let me try that again. So I'm going to go up here, and I did have the social media bar here again. So this is what I had here. I'm going to cut this part here and move it to the footer. So I'm going to move this down here into the footer. And I have Prettier working, so I'm just going to do a quick format for that, and I'm going to save. So hopefully we'll see this update. Here, I'm not sure why it's not. Oh, it did update. So it looks like I left some lines, so that moved that up here. I had some leftover lines, so I'm going to remove those from here. And so header, and so I don't need that horizontal line here. Here. So I'm going to save that and that updated. So now I'm going to go over to Bootstrap, and I'm going to look at this nav bar that they have here, and I'm going to try and put it into the site navigation in place. So I'm just going to start by copying this code right over to my site. I'd like to leave these little spaces while I'm adding it. So I'm going to add this here. And again, I'm going to fix the formatting. So this is the Bootstrap navigation. I'm just going to add a quick note to myself that this one is the Bootstrap navigation. And I will make sure that I snooze Copilot. So in placing that there. I do have ID header, and that was not in the right place. I think it was like right after this. Okay. Okay, so I have the Bootstrap navigation title here. I'm just going to fix the formatting. And so where the nav, looking back here, nav bar, this part should now probably be my name. So I will make where it has nav bar into my name. And I'm going to remove it here. I did like having my pronoun, so I will leave that for now. I'm going to have to move that here. And instead of A, I'm going to make it H1 so that it is the header for this. And again, H1, I'm going to close that there. So this is the button for the nav bar standard. I am going to look at the links that we had. So I want, these are the links that I want to move up there. I am going to, let's see what happens with it. So I'll do a quick save and save, and we'll see if it updates. It did, and the pronouns are there, but I like them smaller. So I may just put this right in with my name in parentheses and leave that there. So I have them. I like that it's a little bit smaller. And so now I'm going to go in and fill in where the hyper references are. So I have these already were here. So I am just going to do this. I'm going to copy out this aspect of it and place it here. So that will now be my about. And then I'm going to do the same for publications for the link. And I'm going to move there, reformatted, and then I'm going to do the same for teaching. So those are my 3 pages. And these are here for teaching. And I need an extra one. So nav item, they have it nav link disabled. I don't want it to be disabled. I want another link. So I'm going to add that. And I'm going to copy this one above to make sure that I'm just going to have the same nav link for each of them. So I'm going to fix this formatting. I could have just done it with prettier by just, again, Shift Option F to do that formatting. And that updated the page. Now I can remove the duplication, and I do like how that looks much better. So this is the other one I had, this old navigation, and I can remove this here and save it, and that should do it. And I do like that much better. And I also just wanted to point out that at the bottom, the social media links did show up at the bottom. And I think this has a little bit of a cleaner look. Thank you so much.